At 6:17 on the morning of November 21st, 1943, the world was burning. The air on Betio Island, part of the Tarawa atoll, tasted of cordite, rotting vegetation, and salt water. Crouched in a shallow, sandy foxhole, Private First Class Marcus Holland gripped his M1 Garand until his knuckles turned white. He was 22 years old. He had been in combat for exactly 4 days. And in those 4 days, he had realized one terrifying truth. They were losing. He wasn't watching the horizon. He wasn't watching the ocean. He was watching a Marine corporal, a kid from Ohio named Miller, crawl forward through the black sand to scout a Japanese machine gun nest. Miller moved perfectly, low to the ground, fast, silent. He was doing everything the Marine Corps had taught him. It didn't matter. A single crack echoed across the palm groves. It wasn't the roar of a machine gun or the boom of artillery. It was a dry, sharp snap. Miller's head jerked back violently. His helmet spun off into the sand. He was dead before the sound of the shot even finished echoing. Holland flinched, pressing himself deeper into the dirt. He didn't return fire. Nobody did. Because there was nothing to shoot at, no muzzle flash, no movement, just the swaying of palm fronds in the hot Pacific breeze. This was the reality of Tarawa. The Japanese had positioned 800 snipers across the island. These weren't just soldiers with rifles, they were ghosts. Expert marksmen who had trained for 2 years for this exact moment. They waited in hollowed-out palm trees inside reinforced concrete bunkers and in spider holes covered with meticulously placed vegetation. They had watched the American forces land for 3 days, and now they were picking them off with surgical, terrifying precision. The morning casualty count was brutal. 47 Marines killed by sniper fire in the first 72 hours alone. Not by mortar shells, not by banzai charges, but by single, invisible bullets delivered from positions that nobody could locate. The snipers fired once, maybe twice, and then went silent. By the time a Marine unit could orient themselves and return fire, the ghost was gone. To understand how Marcus Holland would eventually solve a problem that baffled the entire US Marine Corps command, you have to leave the blood-soaked sand of Tarawa and go back 7 years. You have to go to a wheat farm outside Liberal, Kansas. The Holland family worked 640 acres of hard earth. It was a brutal life, governed by the seasons and the weather. But the biggest threat to the Holland family's survival wasn't the drought or the dust storms. It was the crows. Every August, during harvest season, the crows would descend, not by the dozens, but by the hundreds, a black, squawking plague that covered the sky. They were intelligent, organized, and relentless. They would strip entire rows of wheat before a farmer could even load his shotgun. In 1937, Holland's father lost 38% of his entire crop to the birds. That loss translated to $340 in revenue. 3 months of income vanished into the bellies of black birds. When Marcus turned 13, the war with the crows became his war. His father handed him a battered Winchester .22 rifle and 12 boxes of ammunition. He looked his son in the eye and said, "The wheat is your responsibility now. If we lose it, we don't plant next year." Most boys would have gone out and started shooting wildly into the flocks, but Marcus Holland's father taught him something that wasn't in any Marine Corps manual. He taught him about the economics of ammunition and the psychology of the enemy. "Don't just shoot at them," his father had said, watching a murder of crows circle a distant field. "If you shoot and miss, they just fly to the next field. You waste a bullet, they waste nothing. You have to make them waste their energy. You have to make them commit." The concept was simple, yet profound. Crows were opportunists. They attacked when they saw movement, when they thought they had identified a safe target. The key was to create false movement, to offer them a target that wasn't real, force them to dive, to swoop, to commit to a landing pattern. Holland began to experiment. His first decoy was crude, a flannel shirt stuffed with hay mounted on a wooden cross, but it wasn't static. He attached a long string to the crossbar and ran it 50 yards back to a hideout in the brush. At dawn, when the first scouts of the flock appeared, Holland would pull the string. The shirt would jerk, the arms would sway. To a crow, it looked like a farmer, panic-stricken in the field. They would dive, cawing aggressively, committing to the attack. They would swoop down, expecting to scare a human, but instead they found nothing but straw. Confused, they would circle around and land in the nearest trees to regroup and reassess. And that was the trap. They always landed in the same 3 oak trees. Holland would be waiting there, perfectly camouflaged, his .22 resting on a branch. He killed 47 crows in the first week. By the end of August, the body count was 280. The wheat harvest that year was 94% successful. His father said it was the best yield they'd ever had. Holland never explained the intricate details of the decoy system to his father. He just said, "It worked, but young Marcus understood something fundamental. An enemy, no matter how smart, relies on patterns. They commit to targets based on visual cues, movement, and shape. Once they commit, they are vulnerable. If you can create the right false target, you can control exactly where they go. You can make them play your game." Back on Tarawa, the mathematics were far more brutal. The Japanese snipers were doing exactly what the crows had done. They were waiting for movement, they were committing to targets, and they were killing. But there was a deadly difference. Nobody was making the snipers waste their shots. The American officers were trying everything. They called in artillery barrages on suspected tree lines, turning palm groves into splintered wastelands. Flamethrower teams burned entire sectors of vegetation. Machine gunners poured thousands of rounds into the green canopy. Nothing worked. The snipers simply adapted. They employed a tactic known as one-shot relocate. They would fire a single round from a primary position, killing a Marine. Before the echo died away, they would slip through a trench or a tunnel to a pre-selected secondary position 30 to 50 yards away. They would wait. If the Marines charged the original position, the sniper would shoot them from the new angle. If the Marines stayed put, the sniper would simply wait for another head to pop up. It was a game of attrition, and the Marines were losing. The statistics were terrifying. Each Japanese sniper averaged 6 American casualties before being located and eliminated. 6 Marines dead for every 1 sniper killed. The 2nd Marine Division was bleeding experienced riflemen faster than the landing craft could bring replacements to the beach. Marcus Holland, huddled in his foxhole, watched the carnage with the eyes of a farmer who knew he was watching a pest destroy the harvest. But this time, the harvest was his friends. To the command staff on the ships offshore, the casualties were numbers on a report. To Holland, they were names, they were faces, they were stories. He had lost 3 men from his immediate circle in 3 days. Private First Class Anthony DeMarco was the first. November 19th, during the chaos of the initial landing. DeMarco had been a mechanic from San Francisco, a smart kid with grease permanently under his fingernails. He was careful, he was terrified, like everyone else. But he was careful. He had advanced from the burning beach to a shell crater, seeking cover. He paused, took a breath, and slowly looked over the rim to scout the next position. A single rifle shot punched through the front of his M1 helmet. He was dead before his knees hit the sand. There was no sound of the shot, just the metallic impact and the slump of his body. Lance Corporal Thomas Berkeley was second. Berkeley was a veteran. He had survived the jungle hell of Guadalcanal. He knew how to move in combat. He knew the rhythm of fire. He knew to keep his head down. On November the 20th, he had been crossing a gap between 2 foxholes. He moved fast, stayed low, zigzagging just like the training sergeant said. The sniper got him anyway. One round through the upper chest, piercing the lung. Berkeley fell, gasping for air that wouldn't come. He died 30 seconds later, clutching a picture of his wife in his blood-slicked hand. Corporal David Torres was third. Torres was the squad leader, a 10-year man in the Corps who felt indestructible. He had been directing fire from behind a disabled Amtrak vehicle, shouting orders to his men. He felt safe behind the steel wall. But the sniper had an angle. The bullet came from a palm tree, 200 yards away. Threading a needle through the wreckage, it hit Torres in the neck. Nobody saw the muzzle flash. Nobody found the sniper. Holland had known all three men. He had trained with DeMarco at Camp Pendleton, sharing cigarettes and complaints about the chow. He had shared a transport ship bunk with Berkeley, crossing the endless Pacific, listening to his stories about Guadalcanal. He had taken orders from Torres for 4 months. Now they were gone, erased by an enemy they never saw. The Japanese sniper problem at Tarawa was unlike anything American forces had encountered before. These weren't opportunistic shooters taking pot shots. These were specialists. The Imperial Japanese Army had established specialized sniper schools as early as 1937. The selection process was rigorous. Candidates were chosen for their patience, their vision, and their ability to remain motionless for hours, even days. They trained for 18 months before deployment. They learned camouflage, fieldcraft, range estimation, and advanced marksmanship. The best graduates could hit a man-sized target at 600 yards using only iron sights. No scopes, just iron and eyesight. By 1943, Japan had deployed approximately 1,200 of these trained killers across the Pacific Theater. 800 of them were concentrated on Tarawa. They had been on the island since August. They had 3 months to prepare, 3 months to dig in, 3 months to select firing positions, clear lines of sight, calculate ranges to every likely marine cover spot, and plan escape routes. When the 2nd Marine Division landed, they didn't just walk into a battle, they walked into a killing field designed by architects of death. Some snipers had constructed bamboo platforms inside the island's water cisterns. They would fire through a small opening no larger than a coin, then pull a cover over themselves, vanishing completely. Marine Scout snipers, the American answer to the threat, tried to counter them. The 2nd Division had 12 trained counter-snipers. 12. They were good men, expert riflemen, but the math was impossible. 12 Marines against 800 dug-in Japanese ghosts. By November 21st, the 3rd day of combat, Marine casualties from sniper fire had reached 91 men, killed or wounded, mostly killed. The Japanese snipers didn't shoot to wound, they aimed for the head or the heart. They didn't want to slow the unit down, they wanted to stop it dead. Holland watched this happening. He watched Marines expose themselves for split seconds to move, only to be cut down. He watched the fear grow in the eyes of the men around him. It was a paralysis. If you moved, you died. If you stayed, you waited to die. And in that paralysis, Marcus Holland's mind went back to the wheat fields. He thought about the crows, he thought about the fake shirt on the wooden cross. He thought about the string. What if Marines stopped being the targets, he thought. What if we created targets that weren't real? The idea seemed ridiculous, childish, a farm trick in the middle of a modern war. But as he looked at the body of Corporal Torres being dragged away, Holland realized they had run out of smart military options. It was time to try something stupid. The morning of November 21st found Holland in a foxhole with 3 other men, Corporal Vincent Russo, a hardened squad leader from Brooklyn, Private Lawrence Bennett from Oklahoma, and Private First Class Daniel Carpenter from Georgia. The mood in the hole was heavy. They were listening to the radio chatter, reports of pinned-down squads and invisible shooters. All 4 men had seen too many friends die in the last 72 hours. They were exhausted, dirty, and desperate for something, anything, different. Holland cleared his throat. He told them about Kansas. He told them about the wheat. He told them about the crows. "We're doing it wrong," Holland said, his voice rasping from the dust. "We're waiting for them to shoot us. We need to make them shoot at nothing." Corporal Russo looked at him. Russo had been in combat since Guadalcanal. He had lost 8 men to snipers on Tarawa already. In any other war, in any other situation, suggesting a bird-hunting trick to solve a tactical military crisis would have gotten Holland laughed out of the squad. But nobody was laughing. "How?" Russo asked. "How does a scarecrow help us find a guy hiding in a palm tree?" Holland explained the mechanics. It wasn't about scaring them, it was about revealing them. "Take a helmet," Holland said, "mount it on a stick, raise it slowly, make it look like a Marine peeking over the berm. The sniper sees movement, he sees the shape of a head. His training takes over, he shoots." "So he shoots a helmet," Bennett argued. "So what, he just moves and we're still stuck?" "No," Holland corrected him. "When he shoots, there is a muzzle flash. Even with smokeless powder, there is a flash. There is dust, there is leaf movement. Right now we never see the flash because we're too busy ducking or dying. But if we make him fire at a decoy, we aren't ducking, we're watching." Holland grabbed a bayonet and tapped the side of his helmet. "We trade a piece of steel for his position. We make him waste around to sign his own death warrant." Russo stared at Holland for 10 long seconds. The explosions of the battle seemed to fade into the background. Then the corporal nodded. "Show me," Russo said. It was a crude piece of engineering. Holland took a spare M1 helmet, scavenged from the gear of a fallen Marine. He took a standard-issue trench knife and jammed it into the liner of the helmet. Then he lashed the handle of the knife to a long, splintered piece of wood they had salvaged from a crate. It looked ridiculous, a puppet head on a stick. It wobbled when he moved it. "This is stupid," Carpenter muttered, checking the action on his M1 Garand. "It's supposed to be," Holland replied. He moved to the edge of the foxhole. The lip of the crater was lined with black volcanic sand. Beyond it lay the killing zone, a stretch of battered ground and broken palm trees where 3 Marines had died just hours before. "Get ready," Holland whispered. "Watch the tree line. Northwest sector. Don't look at the helmet. Look for the flash." The tension in the foxhole was electric. Holland crouched low, keeping his own head well below the rim. Slowly, with agonizing deliberation, he began to raise the stick. The helmet crested the edge of the foxhole. Holland didn't just pop it up, he moved it like a human. He tilted it slightly, as if a Marine was carefully scanning the horizon. He paused. He turned it an inch to the left. Russo, Bennett, and Carpenter were glued to their binoculars and rifle sights, scanning the green wall of jungle ahead. 5 seconds passed. Nothing. 10 seconds. Sweat stung Holland's eyes. 15 seconds. Crack. The sound was sharp and immediate. The stick in Holland's hand jerked violently. A metallic ping rang out, loud enough to make them all flinch. The helmet spun on the bayonet, knocked sideways by the kinetic energy of a 6.5mm round. Holland yanked the stick down. The 4 men hit the dirt instinctively, hearts hammering against their ribs. Holland looked at the helmet. There was a clean, jagged hole right through the front, exactly where a Marine's forehead would have been. If that had been real bone and brain, the man would be dead. "Did you see it?" Holland hissed. "I got him," Bennett said, his voice trembling with adrenaline. "I saw it. Palm tree, 80 yards out, about 30 feet up. I saw the leaves shake." The sniper had taken the bait. He had committed. And now he was exposed. Russo didn't hesitate. He grabbed his Browning automatic rifle, BAR. He didn't need to guess anymore. He knew exactly where to look. "Watch the tree," Russo commanded. He mounted the heavy weapon on the lip of the foxhole, took a breath, and unleashed hell. He dumped 20 rounds of .30-06 ammunition into the specific cluster of palm fronds Bennett had identified. The heavy caliber bullets shredded the wood and vegetation. For a moment, there was silence. Then, they heard it. A heavy thud. Then the sound of branches breaking. Then a dull impact on the ground. Bennett and Carpenter advanced carefully, weapons raised. They moved toward the base of the palm tree. There, lying in the dirt, was a Japanese sniper. He was dead, a single bar round through the chest. His Arasaka rifle lay next to him. The magazine was still loaded. He had 7 rounds left. He had traded his life for a hole in an empty helmet. Russo returned to the foxhole and looked at Holland. The skepticism was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve. "How many more helmets can you rig up?" Russo asked. "As many as we have bayonets," Holland replied. "Start making them," Russo ordered. "We're going to kill every sniper on this island using farm tricks." By noon on November 21st, Holland had rigged 8 helmet decoys. The system evolved quickly. They realized that a bare helmet on a stick might look suspicious if the sniper looked too closely, so they improvised. For the second decoy, Holland attached a torn piece of a green fatigue jacket to the bottom of the helmet. Now, when he raised it, it didn't just look like a floating head, it looked like shoulders. It looked like a body. At 13:27 hours, near a destroyed Japanese bunker, Holland tested the new design. He raised the decoy. This time he made it flinch, dropping it down and popping it back up, mimicking a nervous soldier. The sniper couldn't resist. A shot rang out from a spider hole near a disabled tank 120 yards away. The bullet missed the helmet by 6 inches, but the muzzle blast kicked up a cloud of dust. That dust was a beacon. Carpenter put 3 rounds from his M1 Garand into the dark opening of the spider hole. The sniper never fired again. When they checked the hole later, they found the enemy soldier slumped over his rifle, 2 hits to the head. By 1600 hours, Holland's squad had eliminated 7 Japanese snipers, 7 confirmed kills, 0 American casualties. In 1943, there was no internet, but on a battlefield, information spreads faster than a virus. Word of the helmet trick moved through the 2nd Battalion like wildfire. Marines in neighboring sectors heard about Russo's squad clearing their zone without taking hits. They started asking questions. They started improvising their own decoys. Some used helmets on entrenching tools. Others got creative. One resourceful corporal created a dummy head from mud and rags, positioning it on the edge of a trench to look like a Marine sleeping on watch. The Japanese snipers, trained for years to spot the slightest human error, were suddenly facing an army of ghosts. From 100 yards away, through the haze of battle, a helmet on a stick looked exactly like a man. The psychological impact on the enemy was devastating. Japanese doctrine relied on patience and ammo conservation, but now every target was a potential trap. If they shot, they risked revealing their position and dying. If they didn't shoot, they risked letting real Marines advance closer. Hesitation began to creep into the Japanese lines. Snipers started second-guessing their targets. That split second of hesitation was all the Marines needed to move, to flank, and to close the distance. But the enemy wasn't stupid. They adapted. By November 22nd, Japanese commanders realized what was happening. Orders went out. Stop firing at single static targets. Only engage groups, only engage moving targets. It was a smart counter-move. But Marcus Holland was a farmer. He knew that when the crows got smart, you didn't stop hunting, you just changed the bait. By November 23rd, the game had changed. The Japanese snipers had stopped firing at single, isolated movements. They were waiting for sure things. The most deadly example of this discipline was a sniper positioned in the island's central command bunker. He was a ghost in a concrete shell. He fired from deep inside a reinforced structure with multiple firing ports. He had killed 11 Marines in 4 days. Every time American forces suppressed one firing port with machine guns, he would simply move to another port and kill again. He was invincible because he was unpredictable. Staff Sergeant William Parker, a squad leader, who had lost 4 of his own men to this single sniper, decided he was done playing by the enemy's rules. He had heard about Holland's trick, but he knew that one helmet wouldn't fool this elite marksman. So Parker decided to overwhelm him. "He can ignore one," Parker told his men. "Let's see him ignore 6. Parker had his squad construct 6 helmet decoys. He positioned Marines at different angles around the bunker, forming a wide semicircle. The plan was a masterclass in psychological warfare. At 10:15 hours on Parker's signal, all 6 decoys went up simultaneously. Imagine the view through the sniper's iron sights. For days he had been disciplined, but suddenly 6 targets appeared at once. 6 Marines rising from cover to attack. His brain had to process the threat instantly. He couldn't ignore them all. He had to choose. Instinct won over discipline. The sniper fired. He hit one of the decoys on the left flank. The bullet punched through the steel helmet. But in taking that shot, he sealed his fate. The muzzle flash flared from the bunker's northwest firing port. It was visible for less than a second, but with 5 other pairs of eyes watching from different angles, it was enough. "Northwest port!" Parker screamed. The squad didn't just fire back, they erased the position. 30 rounds of rifle fire, 2 full magazines from a BR, and finally a satchel charge thrown perfectly through the opening. When the dust settled and the Marines cleared the bunker, they found the sniper dead. His rifle was still aimed at the port. He had been outsmarted, not by superior firepower, but by a math problem he couldn't solve. The 6 decoy triangulation tactic became standard procedure overnight. By November 24th, American forces had eliminated an estimated 340 Japanese snipers on Tarawa. Most were killed after revealing themselves to a helmet on a stick. The killing field had become a shooting gallery. But the architect of this victory didn't see the end of the battle. Marcus Holland never received a parade. He never received a medal for his innovation. On November 25th, just as the island was being secured, Holland took shrapnel from a stray Japanese artillery shell. It tore into his left leg and shoulder. It was a messy, unglamorous wound. He was carried off the beach on a stretcher, evacuated to a hospital ship, and then sent to Pearl Harbor. His name appeared in the battalion logs only as wounded in action. He never knew that the technique he invented in a foxhole spread beyond Tarawa. He never knew that Marines at Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa would use the exact same principle to survive. He never knew that an engineer battalion on Okinawa would later build sophisticated decoys that could breathe using hand pumps. He just went home. Holland returned to the wheat farm in Kansas in 1946. He married his high school sweetheart, Dorothy. He had 3 children. He lived a quiet life. When neighbors asked about the war, he gave the standard answer of a generation that just wanted to forget. I was an infantryman. We fought the Japanese. We won. He never mentioned the helmets. He never told his wife that he had outsmarted the Imperial Japanese Army with a crow hunting trick. To him, it wasn't a stroke of military genius. It was just a job he did to keep his friends alive. But the Marine Corps didn't forget, or rather, they remembered the trick, even if they forgot the man. Post-war studies analyzed casualty data from every major Pacific campaign. The numbers were undeniable. Units that employed decoy tactics systematically suffered 67% fewer casualties from sniper fire. The helmet decoy was written into the official US Marine Corps training doctrine. Every recruit at Parris Island learned it. Every infantry officer at the basic school studied it as a prime example of battlefield innovation. But in the manuals it was credited to field expedient tactics developed at Tarawa. No name, just a method. It wasn't until 1972 that the past finally knocked on Holland's door. Staff Sergeant William Parker, the man who had used the 6 decoys to clear the command bunker, had never forgotten where he learned the trick. Parker had made a career of the Marines, retiring after 20 years. He had taught the decoy technique to thousands of young soldiers heading to Korea and Vietnam. Parker tracked Holland down to the farm in Kansas. He drove out there, walked up to the porch, and shook the hand of the man who was busy fixing a tractor. "You saved a lot of lives, Marcus," Parker told him. "You deserve the Navy Cross for what you figured out." Holland just shrugged. "I was just trying to keep my head down," he said. "Any farm kid would have done the same." Marcus. Holland died on June 12, 1994. He was 73 years old. His funeral in Liberal, Kansas was small, maybe 40 people, mostly family, a few local friends, and 3 veterans he had served with in his platoon. The local obituary was brief. It mentioned he was a veteran, a Purple Heart recipient, and a farmer. It did not mention that he had changed the course of counter-sniper warfare. But as the service was ending, 4 cars pulled up. 4 men, strangers to the family, walked toward the grave. They were older now, grey-haired, moving a bit stiffly. They weren't from Kansas. They introduced themselves to Holland's children. They were Marines. They had served in different wars, 1 in Korea, 3 in Vietnam. They had never met Marcus Holland, but they had tracked him down through veteran networks for one reason. "We're here," one of them said, his voice thick with emotion, "because we used his trick. I was in a rice paddy in '68. A sniper had us pinned. I remembered the helmet drill. I used it. The sniper shot the helmet. We got the sniper." He looked at Holland's casket. "I'm alive today because of your father. My kids are alive because of your father." Today, if you visit the National Museum of the Marine Corps, you might find a display about Tarawa. Behind the glass, there is a rusted M1 helmet mounted on a bayonet. The placard reads, "Improvised decoy used to locate enemy positions, 1943. It doesn't bear Marcus Holland's name. History has a way of remembering the generals and forgetting the farmers. But that's how innovation actually happens in war. It doesn't come from a committee in a clean room in Washington. It comes from a 22-year-old kid, scared out of his mind, staring at a problem, and remembering a lesson from home. It comes from the realization that sometimes the smartest way to fight a complex war is to do something stupid. Marcus Holland continued to hunt crows every August until the year he died. He never missed a harvest. And somewhere, on a battlefield even today, a soldier is raising a decoy above a trench, waiting for a flash, using a trick born in a Kansas wheat field to stay alive. If this story moved you, if you believe that heroes like Marcus Holland deserve to be remembered by name, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that history matters. And if you want more stories of the unsung, the innovators, and the legends who got left out of the textbooks, subscribe and turn on notifications. We are digging these stories out of the archives every single week. I want to know, is there a simple, stupid trick you've used in your life that actually worked? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.